The album Clancy contains a number of wonderful songs, very well written, produced, and performed. But it is not enough to take these songs and look at them and consider them holistically. I think it is also worthwhile to examine the songs more closely, to look more specifically at individual lines, not just whole verses, but lines and phrases within those verses, which are either significant or important for one reason or another. The first of these that I wanted to look at are these lyrics from the first song on the album, Overcompensate. These lyrics are contained in the first verse, and they read as follows. I feel like I was just here, same twitching in my eyes. Don't sleep on a boy who can't fall asleep twice in the same night. Now, in many ways, these lyrics are reminiscent of lyrics that we might have seen in something like No Fun Intended, especially this idea of sleeplessness. Obviously, the imagery of the eyes is important, and we can return to that in a moment, but this element of sleeplessness is something which has always fascinated me throughout their songs. Again, like I mentioned, it's something which shows up quite a bit in No Fun Intended. It's obviously a song taken by sleep, but even songs like Hear Me Now, with that lyric, I go to sleep every night, I should be good at it by now, which is one of my favorite lines off of that album. There's this idea that as someone who perhaps struggles with insomnia, there's a sort of other world which he inhabits. And you see this again in Routines in the Night. This idea that there's this world which he inhabits and which he occupies and walks in, that's a very lonely world, right? Everyone around is asleep, and he was asleep. But now that he's woken up, he can't fall asleep again. And so he spends this time, perhaps lying in his bed, staring up at his ceiling, and the ceiling fan above him, creating worlds out of that sleeplessness. And from that, we get the world, or the city of Dima, and then eventually the world of Trench. Now, how does that all connect to Overcompensate? Well, it all connects, broadly speaking, of course. But it's sort of been a subtle theory of mine, perhaps even a subconscious theory of mine that I haven't really quite fleshed out, that the world of Dima is a world which he occupies at night. And so this line that begins this segment, I feel like I was just here, same twitching in my eyes. The twitching eyes of sleeplessness, right? Tired, foggy eyes, twitching uncontrollably as he tries to stay awake and yet can't find rest in sleep, are a sign and a signal of the fact that he has entered this sleepless world again, right? He was just here, feels like he was just here in Dima, and now he's back, right? It's a new night, as it were. Perhaps all of that is completely ungrounded, and I'm reading something into these songs that really isn't there. But I think in many ways it does make a lot of sense, and this lyric always stuck out to me in Overcompensate because of that, and just in terms of how it's written, the rhythm of it, the lyricism, all of that. It is one of my favorite lines from the song. The next song I wanted to look at was the song Backslide. And there's this interesting line here at the end of the second verse, which reads, I used to be the champion of a world you can't see. Now I'm drowning in logistics. Some people, when the song first came out, given the name of the song, speculated that this was referring to, or a hint, a clue, that Clancy was going to become a bishop, or that he had formerly been a bishop, right? This ties into the idea that Clancy and Blurryface, even in the world of Dima, are the same person. And so he used to rule the world, as Blurryface does, rule this world of Dima, and Trench, more in a sense, although strictly speaking, it seems like Blurryface is simply just the ruler of that one city, not Trench as a whole. But they do have power and authority outside Dima, obviously. They can go into Trench and bring people back, so they do rule Trench in a sense. So the idea that he used to be occupying the position that Blurryface did, but he doesn't want to backslide into Blurryface, right? He doesn't want to take on that face and that name again. And so now he's drowning in the logistics of trying to get away from that. That is one potential theory, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But another way that we can look at this is the idea that Tyler, or Clancy was the champion of the world of Trench, broadly speaking, not Dima. He was the symbol of hope and the symbol of rebellion for the Banditos. He was their champion. And then at the end of Paladin Street, he kind of breaches that trust. He betrays it, and he becomes a ruler in his own right, wielding absolute power over the citizens, as we saw in his most recent letter. And so he was a champion, and now he's just drowning in the logistics of leadership. And it's a leadership which those who used to uphold him as a champion now resent him for his rule. Regardless, I thought it was interesting to look at this line now, taken in the context of the upcoming album, and even before that announcement came out, in the context of the letters which we've seen from the Banditos and from the Torchbearer to Clancy, and then, of course, from Clancy himself. Next up is the song Snapback. In the first verse, we hear the following. Have I burnt all the bridges? Bite the hand that helps me, give it finger stitches. Blacklisted from forgiveness. These lines are probably my favorite from this song, and some of my favorite lines in the album as a whole. Not necessarily because there's some really clear way in which they tie into the lore, although I'm sure there is, but what stands out to me more is just the lyricism of it. This idea that whether intentionally or not, you reject a helping hand and in fact turn on it instead. And then whether because of that or as a cause of that, you are blacklisted from forgiveness. What do I mean by as a cause of that? Well, perhaps you could reject help from someone who offers it to you. You consider yourself to be blacklisted from receiving their forgiveness. And so you reject their offers of help. And similar to Backslide, this is sort of a song which we could see taking place in a moment at which he is struggling with becoming a bishop, or the temptation to become a bishop, to wield absolute power. This idea that he has turned away from people like the Torchbearer. The Torchbearer, really, all he ever does throughout the story is offer him help. From the first moment we saw him in Jumpsuit, and throughout the Trench trilogy. But Clancy seems to be turning away from him now. Whether because he resents him, resents the way he is trying to help him, resents the reminder the Torchbearer offers him of where he came from and the fact that he must do better than the bishops, must not succumb to wielding absolute power for his own ends. And the idea that now, having turned away from the Torchbearer, he has burnt his bridge with him, and when he needs his help later, he won't receive it. And then finally, the final song on Clancy, Paladin Straight. The bridge contains some of my favorite lines on the song, and goes as follows. Here's my chance, time to take it. Can't be sure that I'll make it, even though I'm past the point of no return. I'm all in, I'm surrounded. Put my money where my mouth is, even though I'm past the point of no return. I mentioned earlier that there is a tragedy at the heart of Clancy's story, and perhaps the way that this will ultimately manifest itself, as some have speculated in the past, is that Clancy will sacrifice himself. Now, I think, broadly speaking, the way people imagine this will happen is that Clancy will die in order that others might live. But perhaps it's not quite that simple. Perhaps Clancy must succumb to the temptation of control in order to create a diversion. There isn't much that I have to add to these lyrics that isn't quite obvious on the surface. But nonetheless, they are some of my favorite lyrics. I think they're important, they're significant. Obviously, we see this kind of played out in the video itself. But nonetheless, I thought they would be worth mentioning. Again, like I said, not necessarily because I have a whole lot to add that everyone isn't already aware of. These lyrics are pretty clear on the face of it, what they're talking about. But they are very significant lyrics and very well written, especially in the context of the song Paladin Straight. And that concludes a brief look through some of the key and significant lyrics in the album Clancy.